No one noticed when the old woman slipped through the broken iron gate just before dusk. The abandoned asylum stood on the edge of town like a forgotten scar. Windows shattered, ivy crawling up its walls, a place people avoided, even during the day. At night, it became something else entirely, an echo chamber for rumors, fear, and unfinished stories. Yet she walked toward it without hesitation. Her name was Margaret, though she hadn't spoken it out loud in years. She carried no suitcase, only a worn coat, a small flashlight, and a heart that had been running for more than 5 decades. If you've ever wondered whether the past can truly be outrun, stay with this story until the end, because what she found inside that building would finally answer that question. Margaret had been moving for weeks, bus to bus, shelter to shelter, never staying long enough for anyone to ask too many questions. Her hands shook when she slept, not from the cold, but from memory. When the last shelter turned her away, she didn't argue. She simply nodded, turned, and walked into the night. That's when she remembered the asylum. She had been there once before, but that was a lifetime ago. The asylum had closed decades earlier, after scandals, lawsuits, and whispers no one wanted to confirm. Officially, it was condemned. Unofficially, people said the walls still listened. Margaret found a side door hanging open, its hinges screaming softly as she pushed inside. The smell hit her first: dust, mold, and something older. Something human. She clicked on the flashlight. The hallway stretched endlessly, paint peeling like shed skin. Wheelchairs lay overturned. Papers littered the floor, yellowed and brittle. For a moment she considered turning back, but the past had already followed her here. She chose a small room on the second floor, a former patient room, judging by the metal bed frame bolted to the floor. She sat down slowly, as if afraid the building might reject her. That night, she barely slept. Every sound made her flinch. The wind through broken windows sounded like whispers. Footsteps echoed where no one walked. Still, she stayed. Days passed. Margaret learned the building's rhythms: morning light through shattered glass, pigeons nesting in the rafters, silence so heavy it pressed against her chest. She scavenged nearby dumpsters for food. She drank water from a rusted sink that still, somehow, worked. And slowly, something strange began to happen. She felt watched, not in fear, in recognition. On the 4th day, while exploring deeper into the asylum, she found the records room. The door was half collapsed, but inside were metal filing cabinets, stretching wall to wall. Thousands of files, forgotten lives stacked in drawers. Margaret froze. She hadn't planned to come here. Her hands trembled as she stepped inside. Dust filled the air as she pulled open a drawer at random. Names, dates, diagnoses, admissions. She told herself she was only curious. Then she saw a familiar date, 1957. Her breath caught. She opened the file. The name at the top made her knees buckle. Margaret Ellis. Her own name stared back at her, typed in fading ink. For a long moment she couldn't breathe. She lowered herself onto the floor, the file shaking in her hands. This wasn't possible. She had left this place, escaped it, buried it so deeply that even her own mind refused to visit it. Yet here it was. Her file. She forced herself to read. Patient admitted at age 19. Symptoms include acute anxiety, dissociation, recurring nightmares. Patient claims responsibility for an incident she refuses to describe. Margaret squeezed her eyes shut. The incident. The words she had never said out loud. When she was young, she had worked as a nurse's aide at the same asylum. Naive, trusting, desperate to prove herself. One night, a patient escaped his room. There was chaos, screaming, a door left unlocked. By morning, another patient was found unresponsive. The investigation was rushed. Someone had to take the blame. Margaret had confessed. Not because she was guilty, but because no one would listen when she tried to explain. Her family turned away. The town whispered. The asylum kept her. Years later, a fire destroyed part of the building. Records were lost, staff scattered. And in the confusion, Margaret was quietly released. No apology, no correction. Just silence. She spent the rest of her life running from a truth no one cared to uncover. Until now. Margaret turned the page. Her heart pounded as she read the final entry. Case re-evaluated. New evidence suggests patient confession unreliable. Responsibility uncertain. Recommendation, release, and review. Her chest tightened. They had known. They had known she wasn't responsible, and they never told her. Tears blurred the words. All those years, all that running, all that shame. She pressed the file to her chest and sobbed, the sound echoing through empty halls. If this story is touching you, take a moment to like this video. It helps these forgotten stories reach more people who need to hear them. Margaret didn't know how long she sat there. Eventually, she noticed something else, another folder clipped inside her file, a memo, recently added. Her brow furrowed. Someone had been here. The memo was dated just 2 weeks earlier. Building scheduled for demolition, all remaining files to be reviewed by historical committee. Margaret's breath hitched. This wasn't just her past. It was about to disappear forever. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, Margaret walked back into town for the first time in years. She went straight to the local library. Her hands shook as she asked for help scanning documents. The librarian looked at her worn coat, her tired eyes, but said nothing. Together, they digitized her file, then another, and another. Margaret stayed until closing. Over the next days, she returned again and again, bringing stacks of files from the asylum. Forgotten names, unheard stories, proof that many lives had been quietly buried by neglect and fear. Word spread. A journalist noticed, then a historian, then a lawyer. The demolition was halted, an investigation was opened, and Margaret's name, once whispered in shame, was spoken again. This time with care. At a small town meeting weeks later, Margaret stood at the podium. Her hands still shook, but her voice didn't. I ran for most of my life, she said. Not because I was guilty, but because no one ever told me I was free. The room was silent. If you are carrying a past that was never truly yours, she continued, please hear this. Running doesn't erase it. Facing it does. The town applauded. Margaret felt something she hadn't felt since she was 19. Release. If this message resonates with you, consider subscribing. These stories are about pain, but also about truth, healing, and the courage to stop running. Margaret never returned to the asylum. It was preserved as a historical site. Her file was displayed behind glass, not as a record of shame, but as evidence of a system that failed and a woman who survived it. For the first time in her life, Margaret rented a small room under her real name. She slept deeply, and when she woke, the past no longer chased her, because she had finally turned around and faced it. Thank you for staying until the end. Share this story with someone who might still be running and needs to know they're allowed to stop.